Paul McCartney is one of the most famous musicians on the planet and a key figure in a little band from Liverpool called the Beatles, but also had huge hits with his band Wings and with his solo work too. However, when Paul McCartney turned 40, he was inspired to pick up a paintbrush with the old adage, life begins at 40. But his relationship with art goes back to his childhood in Liverpool. At school, Paul remembers being fascinated by the contents of the stationery cupboard, plain, blank paper and boxes full of pencils that filled his head with dreams. The idea of an empty background as a starting point, be it a white wall or a clean canvas, is still a source of inspiration for Paul. He talks about the excitement and challenge of killing the canvas or making the initial mark on the surface. It's interesting to note that the minimalist cover for the Beatles' White Album was conceived by Paul with his friend, one of the first pop artists, Richard Hamilton. When Paul was 11, he used money from a school prize to buy his first art book, which included works by Dali and Picasso. Then, at 14, he won an art prize for a drawing of St Aidan's Church on the Speke housing estate where he lived. The church reappears in Paul's 1990 painting, Home Territory, along with his childhood homes in Western Avenue and 4th Lynn Road. In the early years of the Beatles, John Lennon and former member Stuart Sutcliffe attended art college. Paul, consequently, felt inhibited by his lack of formal art training, a block he only conquered later in life. The irony is, he didn't have any formal music training either, but this failed to prevent him from becoming one of the most influential and pioneering songwriters of all time. During the 60s, he became friendly with art critic John Dunbar and gallery owner Robert Fraser. Through their circle of influential friends and young artists, Paul became familiar with the contemporary art of the day, meeting people like Peter Blake, who would go on to design the Sgt. Pepper's album cover, and as I've said before, Richard Hamilton, who came up with the concept for the White Album. And these were both based on ideas that Paul developed with them. Paul would spend lots of time with his friend Robert Fraser at his Indica gallery, helping with the installation of art exhibitions and feeding his enthusiasm for art. Around this time, he began collecting and bought a number of paintings by the Surrealist painter René Magritte, whose influence on Paul's own painting is considerable. A Magritte painting of a big green apple bought by Paul from Robert Fraser became the inspiration behind the Beatles' world-famous Apple logo. His then wife, Linda McCartney, later bought Magritte's easel and spectacles for him to encourage him to take up painting. As one of the most charismatic figures of the day, Robert Fraser worked with many exciting names in the contemporary art world, and even introduced Paul to Andy Warhol. The day they met, they spent the whole evening watching one of Warhol's movies on Paul's home projection system. Warhol appears in Paul's 1990 painting, Andy in the Garden. For Paul, much of his painting is to do with process, the application of the paint, the colours and textures evolving into the composition. Many of these themes and titles are accidental and inspired by what happens on the canvas, particularly his paintings of people. Andy Warhol and John Lennon appear in his paintings. A work named Bowie Spewing came as the result of paint dripping down the canvas, and when he looked closely, he noticed it looked like Ziggy Stardust. He painted Linda McCartney many times. In Yellow Linda with piano, her blonde hair and yellow top inspired the piece, with all the furniture and objects also painted in yellow. The same vibrant colours appear in Linda Yellow Red Cross, where Linda is depicted with a red cross and a heart and a castle. He also painted her in Large Yellow Face. There is also a strong Celtic theme running through many paintings, influenced by Paul's enthusiasm for the ancient and his own Celtic Irish roots. The theme of big open spaces recurs in his Arizona landscapes. As a man who has lived his life in the public eye, solitude is evidently inspirational, and these pictures project a great sense of liberty and joy. Paul credits the artist Willem de Kooning with being one of his greatest influences, as well as being a family friend. They met at the end of the 70s when de Kooning was a client of Linda's father's law firm. Linda and Paul frequently visited the artist in his studio in New York. Paul would become so fired up by the visits that he would go to the art shop on the way home and buy all the same paints and canvases as de Kooning, or Bill as he affectionately called him. Paul remembers de Kooning's attitude to his painting as a particular source of inspiration. One day he asked the artist what his painting was meant to be, to which de Kooning replied, "I don't know. It looks like a sofa, doesn't it?" Paul found that remark profoundly liberating and said he never looked back after that. In 2002, fittingly, Paul had his first comprehensive exhibition of paintings in England at the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool, a mark of the affection and loyalty that Paul feels to his hometown. The exhibition included more than 60 of Paul's paintings. What do you think about Paul McCartney's art? Leave your comments below and subscribe for more videos on the lives of the artists.